The clinking of champagne flutes was the only music I wanted to hear for the rest of my life. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated triumph. Our living room, usually a quiet sanctuary of leather-bound books and warm wood, was buzzing with the energy of a dozen of our closest friends and family. The late afternoon sun streamed through the bay windows, casting a golden glow on the joyful faces, making the moment feel sacred, preordained. At the center of it all stood my son, David. My son. At 36, he was the spitting image of what I wished I had been at his age: sharp, confident, with a jawline that could cut glass, and a mind that moved with the terrifying precision of a master watchmaker. He was wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than my first car, and he wore it with an easy grace that made him seem born to it. He was holding up a copy of the Washington Post, the headline circled in red marker: David Peterson nominated for federal judgeship. My heart swelled with a pride so immense it felt like a physical pressure in my chest. This wasn't just his victory, it was ours. It was the culmination of 37 years of marriage, of sacrifice, of Eleanor and me pouring everything we had into this brilliant young man. I caught Eleanor's eye from across the room. My Eleanor. Even at 63, she possessed a grace that could still a room. Her silver hair was styled in an elegant chignon, and her blue eyes, the same shade as a summer sky, crinkled at the corners as she smiled at me. It was a smile I had known for nearly 4 decades, a smile that had been my anchor through every storm and my reward in every victory. She raised her glass to me, a silent toast to our shared success, to the life we had built from scratch. I smiled back, feeling a wave of love so profound it almost brought tears to my eyes. We had done it. Our boy, the son of a retired history professor and a former legal aide, was going to be a federal judge. It was the American dream, polished to a high shine and served on a silver platter. As the party swirled around me, I moved through the crowd, accepting handshakes and claps on the back, my mind a highlight reel of David's life. I saw him taking his first wobbly steps on this very rug. I saw him hitting his first home run in Little League, his face beaming under a helmet 3 sizes too big. I remembered the late nights helping him with history papers, the thrill of watching him excel in mock trial competitions in college, the gut-wrenching pride of seeing him graduate from law school summa cum laude. Every memory was a brick, and together they had built this magnificent cathedral of a moment. I found David near the fireplace, listening intently to his uncle drone on about property taxes. I rescued him, pulling him into a fierce hug. "I am so damn proud of you, son," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. He hugged me back, his embrace strong and sure. "I couldn't have done it without you and Mom," he said, his voice earnest. "You two are the foundation for everything." The word foundation echoed in my mind. That's what we were, solid, unshakable, a foundation of love and support that had allowed our son to build his life so high. The party wound down as evening fell. The last of the guests departed, leaving behind a pleasant chaos of empty glasses and half-eaten plates of hors d'oeuvres. David had left an hour earlier, needing to prepare for the media whirlwind that was about to descend upon him. It was just me and Eleanor now, standing in the quiet aftermath of our joy. "Well, that was a success," I said, starting to gather glasses. Eleanor didn't respond. I turned to look at her. She was standing by the window, staring out into the twilight, her posture rigid. The smile from earlier was gone, replaced by a strange, haunted expression. Her face was pale, almost ashen in the dim light. "Ellie?" I asked, my voice soft. "Are you all right? You seem a million miles away." She turned slowly, her eyes meeting mine. The summer sky in them had clouded over, dark and stormy. "Sam," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "we need to talk." I felt a prickle of unease. Her tone was one I hadn't heard in years, a tone reserved for bad news, for tragedies. Of course, I said, setting the glasses down. What is it? Is it about your sister? Is she okay? She shook her head, her movements slow, deliberate. No, not my sister. It's about David, about the nomination. Confusion clouded my mind. What about it? This is the best day of his life, of our lives. It could be the worst, she breathed, and a single tear escaped, tracing a path down her perfectly powdered cheek. There's something you don't know, Sam. Something from a long time ago. Something I've kept hidden for 37 years. My blood ran cold. 37 years? The length of our marriage? Hidden what? I asked, my voice suddenly hoarse. She crossed the room and sank onto the sofa, her hands twisting in her lap. She looked fragile, like a porcelain doll on the verge of shattering. I sat in the armchair opposite her, the space between us suddenly feeling like a chasm. When we first moved to Washington, she began, her eyes fixed on the floor, for my clerkship, you remember how excited we were. I nodded, the memory still vivid. We were young, broke, and ridiculously in love, living in a tiny apartment that smelled of old paint, convinced we were on the verge of conquering the world. I was an adjunct professor, and she had landed a coveted clerkship with a federal judge. It was the start of everything. I was ambitious, Sam. You know I was. I wanted to make a name for myself. I wanted to prove I belonged there. And you did, I said gently. You were brilliant. A bitter, hollow laugh escaped her lips. I was naive, and I was foolish. She finally looked up at me, her eyes swimming with a guilt so profound it seemed to drown her. My supervising judge, his name was Marcus Thorne. The name meant nothing to me. I shook my head. Okay. He's still on the bench, Sam, she said, her voice trembling. He's older now, a senior judge. He's powerful, very powerful. And he sits on the Senate Judiciary Committee. He's on the very committee that will hold David's confirmation hearing. A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. What are you saying, Eleanor? That this judge had a grudge against you? That he'll hold it against David? Worse, she whispered, the word hanging in the air like a death sentence. So much worse. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the kind one takes before plunging into icy water. Judge Marcus Thorne and I, we had an affair. The world tilted on its axis. The comfortable, solid ground I had stood on for 37 years crumbled away, leaving me in a free fall. The 4 words echoed in the sudden, deafening silence of the room. We had an affair. It didn't make sense. The sentence was a jumble of alien sounds. Eleanor? My Eleanor? The woman who still held my hand during movies? The woman who left little notes in my suitcase when I traveled for conferences? The woman whose unwavering fidelity had been the bedrock of my entire adult life? It was impossible. A mistake. A cruel joke. No, I said, the word coming out as a strangled croak. No, that's not true. You're tired. The party, it was overwhelming. You're confused. Her face crumpled, and the tears came in earnest now, silent, desperate streams of grief. I wish I was, Sam. God, I wish I was confused. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I stared at her, my mind refusing to process the information. It was like trying to solve a complex equation where none of the numbers added up. An affair. The word itself was ugly, a stain on the pristine canvas of our life together. I felt a surge of white-hot anger, so intense it made me dizzy. I wanted to scream, to break something, to smash the champagne flutes that only an hour ago had symbolized our perfect life. But I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, frozen in a state of shock and disbelief. When? I finally managed to ask, my voice sounding like it belonged to a stranger. When we first moved to D.C., she sobbed into her hands. That first year. We were so young. You were working all the time, trying to get tenure. I was alone in that big, intimidating city. And he paid attention to me. He? I spat the word out. Judge Marcus Thorne. The name now sounded like a curse. He was my mentor. He was charismatic, powerful. He told me I was the most brilliant clerk he'd ever had. He took me under his wing. Lunches turned into dinners, late nights at the office. It just happened. It just happened, I repeated, my voice rising with a dangerous edge. Things like that don't just happen, Eleanor. Decisions are made, choices. You chose to do this. To me, to us. I know, she cried, looking up at me, her face a mess of tears and mascara. I know, Sam, and I have lived with the guilt of it every single day for 37 years. Every single day. The anger receded, replaced by a cold, hollowing emptiness. 37 years. A lifetime. Every anniversary, every shared laugh, every intimate moment was now cast in the shadow of this lie. Was any of it real? Or was I just the fool who never knew? Why? I asked, the question feeling impossibly small for the betrayal. Why are you telling me this now, after all this time? Why ruin this night? Because of him, she exclaimed, a note of panic in her voice. Because of Thorne, don't you see? He's going to be there, looking at our son. David has our last name. Thorne will know who he is. He'll remember me. What if he says something? What if he tries to sabotage David's nomination to get back at me, or just to exert his power? He was a cruel man, Sam, a manipulative, cruel man. This secret could destroy David's career before it even begins. My son. The thought of David brought a fresh wave of nausea. Our perfect day, his perfect day, was now tainted by this sordid secret from a past I never knew existed. The foundation wasn't just cracked, it was a fraud. You ended it? I asked, needing to know. Yes, she said emphatically. After a few months, I was consumed with guilt. I loved you, Sam. I never stopped loving you. I realized what a monstrous mistake I had made, and I ended it. I told him I couldn't see him anymore. I quit the clerkship early, told you I was burnt out. That's when we moved back here. I remembered that time. She had seemed withdrawn, depressed. I had attributed it to the stress of the high-pressure DC legal world. I had babied her, cooked for her, held her while she cried, never once suspecting the real reason for her pain. I had been comforting the author of my own betrayal. The irony was a better pill to swallow. I stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the same view Eleanor had been looking at earlier. The neighbor's porch light cast long, distorted shadows across our lawn. My own reflection stared back at me from the dark glass, a tired, old man who had just discovered his entire life was a lie. So, for 37 years, I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion, you let me believe we were perfect. You let me build my entire world on a lie. I was scared, she whispered from the sofa. I was terrified of losing you. And then we had David, and everything was so good. It was a mistake I made when I was a girl. I buried it. I prayed it would stay buried forever. I never thought it would come back like this. But it did, I said, turning to face her. The woman I had loved for my entire adult life looked like a stranger to me now. Her face was a mask of grief, but all I could see was the deceit hiding behind it. It did come back, and now it's threatening to burn down everything we ever built, especially our son. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It was filled with the ghosts of 37 years of unspoken words, of a secret that had festered in the heart of our marriage. The celebration was over. The champagne had lost its fizz, and I had a sickening feeling that the life I knew had just ended. The days that followed were a waking nightmare. I moved into the guest room, the 10 feet of hallway between our doors feeling like an unbridgeable canyon. We existed in the same house as polite, grieving strangers. The air was thick with unspoken accusations and unanswered questions. Sleep offered no escape. My dreams were haunted by a faceless man in a judge's robe, laughing as he smashed the foundation of my home with a gavel. I would wake up in a cold sweat, the name Marcus Thorne a poison on my tongue. I, Samuel Peterson, the history professor, the man who prided himself on research, on understanding the past, had been living in a historical fallacy. My own personal history was a fiction, and Eleanor was its sole, unreliable narrator. I needed facts. I needed evidence. I couldn't just accept her tearful, fragmented version of events. My historian's mind, the very thing I had dedicated my life to, kicked into overdrive. It was a defense mechanism, a way to process the emotional cataclysm by turning it into a research project. My first stop was the attic. It was our museum, a dusty repository of a shared lifetime. I pulled down the heavy wooden ladder and ascended into the dim, stuffy space. The air smelled of old paper and cedar. I found the boxes labeled DC 1986. My hands trembled as I sliced through the yellowed packing tape. Inside were relics from a life I thought I knew. Photographs of a young, smiling Eleanor and me, posing in front of the Lincoln Memorial. My letters to her, filled with the earnest, slightly pretentious prose of a young academic in love. Her letters to me were there too. I sat on a dusty trunk and began to read them, searching for clues, for any hint of the darkness she was hiding. Her letters were cheerful, full of anecdotes about the courthouse and the other clerks. But reading them now, with the curse of knowledge, I could see the cracks. Judge Thorne is taking a special interest in my work, one letter read. He says I have a brilliant legal mind. It's a lot of pressure, but I'm learning so much. At the time, I had read that with a swell of pride. Now the words felt sinister. The phrase special interest made my stomach churn. I found a diary she kept that year. It was a simple cloth-bound book. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, the truth in her own hand. I opened it. The first few months were filled with detailed entries about her work, her impressions of the city, her love for me. Then the entries became shorter, more sporadic. There was a shift in tone. MT is incredibly brilliant, but so intimidating. He sees right through you. A week later, dinner with MT tonight to discuss the briefs. Sam, I miss you so much it hurts. I felt a pang of guilt. I had been buried in my own work, chasing tenure, leaving her to navigate that shark-infested water alone. Then came the entry that stopped my breath. I did something terrible. I've ruined everything. I can't write it down.
I can't even think it. God, forgive me. Sam, forgive me. The entry was dated October 12, 1986. After that, the pages were blank. She had simply stopped writing. The blank pages screamed louder than any confession. They were a testament to a guilt so profound it had silenced her. I sat there in the dusty silence of the attic, the diary in my hands, feeling the weight of 37 years of deception settle upon me. It wasn't just an affair. It was a wound she had hidden, letting it fester in the dark while I remained blissfully unaware. My research project took on a new urgency. I told Eleanor I was going to a historical conference in Philadelphia, a lie that slipped out with sickening ease. My real destination was Washington, D.C. I needed to see the place where my life had fractured. I needed to walk the same streets she had walked, to stand in front of the courthouse where she had betrayed me. I needed to understand the geography of my own ruin. The E. Barrett Prettyman United States Courthouse was an imposing, soulless building. I stood across the street, a tourist in the wreckage of my own marriage. I imagined a 26-year-old Eleanor walking up those steps, full of ambition and hope, unaware of the predator waiting inside. I tried to picture Marcus Thorne. What did he look like? Was he handsome, charming? I did a search on my phone. The current pictures showed a man in his early 70s, with a shock of white hair, a patrician nose, and cold, calculating eyes. Even in his official portrait, there was an air of arrogance about him, a predatory stillness. I found older articles from the 80s. There he was. Younger, his hair still dark, but with the same arrogant smirk. He was handsome, I had to admit, in a sharp, severe way. I could see how a young, impressionable woman could be drawn into his orbit. My final, desperate act of historical inquiry was the most painful. I went to the Library of Congress, to the newspaper archives. I spent hours scrolling through microfiche, looking at old society pages from the DC papers in 1986. I didn't know what I was looking for. A photo, a mention, anything. And then I found it. A grainy, black and white photo from a judicial charity gala. There, in the background, almost out of focus, was Judge Marcus Thorne. And on his arm, laughing at something he'd said, was a beautiful young woman with dark hair. It was Eleanor. She was wearing a black dress I didn't recognize. She looked radiant, happy. She looked like she was in love. I felt the air leave my lungs, a physical, crushing blow. This wasn't a sordid, guilt-ridden mistake in a dimly lit office. This was public. They were out, together. My wife? On the arm of another man. I printed the image, the cheap paper warm in my hands. I stared at it for a long time. This was my evidence, my Exhibit A, the proof that the woman I had married was a stranger to me. I folded the paper and put it in my wallet, a permanent, painful reminder of the truth. When I returned home, the polite truce between Eleanor and me shattered. I walked into the kitchen, where she was preparing dinner, the picture of domestic tranquility. I didn't say a word. I simply took the faded printout from my wallet and placed it on the counter beside the chopped onions. She looked down at it. Her breath hitched. The color drained from her face. She reached out a trembling hand to steady herself on the counter. "Sam," she breathed, "where did you get this?" "Does it matter?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. I thought this was a mistake, a moment of weakness. You failed to mention you were parading your mistake around at charity galas. "It wasn't like that," she pleaded, her eyes wide with panic. "He insisted I attend. It was for work. Everyone took their clerks." Did everyone hold their clerk's hand like that? Did everyone look at their clerk like that? I pointed a shaking finger at the photo. "Look at yourself, Eleanor. You're glowing. You're happy. Don't you dare tell me this was just some terrible mistake you were consumed with guilt over. You were enjoying it." "I was at first," she confessed, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "Yes, I was. I was young and stupid, and he made me feel important. He made me feel seen. Is that what you want to hear? But it turned, Sam. It turned ugly. He became possessive, controlling. It wasn't love. It was ownership. It terrified me. That's when I ended it. That's when I ran back home to you." We stood there, shouting in the kitchen that had hosted decades of happy family dinners. We hurled years of unspoken pain at each other. My betrayal, her guilt, my naivete, her fear. It was a storm that had been brewing for 37 years, and it was finally breaking. In the midst of our argument, a new, terrifying question emerged, one that had been lurking in the back of my mind since my trip to DC. "We have to tell David," I said, the fight suddenly draining out of me, replaced by a cold dread. "He has to know what he's walking into. He has to be prepared for Thorne." Eleanor recoiled as if I had struck her. "No, absolutely not. We can't. Sam, it will destroy him. His image of me, of us, of his entire childhood. It will shatter his confidence right before the biggest moment of his life. We can't do that to him." "And what's the alternative?" I shot back. "Let him walk into that hearing blind? Let Thorne hold this over his head? Or worse, let some reporter dig it up and splash it all over the news? His nomination would be dead on arrival. His career would be ruined. We have to tell him. He's not a child, Eleanor. He's a man. He deserves the truth." "The truth will break him," she whispered, tears streaming down her face again. "No," I said, my voice hardening. "The lies will break him. The lies have already broken me." The decision was made. The argument was over. We had to tell our son. We had to confess the sin that had been committed a decade before he was even born. A sin whose consequences were now about to fall squarely on his shoulders. We were about to take the perfect world we had built for him and set it on fire. And I had no idea if any of us would survive the blaze. The drive to David's office was the longest of my life. Eleanor sat in the passenger seat, silent and brittle, staring out the window. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. We were a funereal procession on our way to bury the version of our family that had existed just a week ago. David's law firm occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming glass skyscraper downtown. Everything about the place screamed success and power.
We were led into his corner office, a minimalist space with a panoramic view of the city. He stood to greet us, a warm smile on his face, though it faltered slightly when he saw our expressions. "Mom, Dad, what's wrong? You both look like you've seen a ghost." We sat on the sleek leather chairs opposite his massive mahogany desk. The view behind him was breathtaking, the city sprawling out like a map of his future conquests. And we were here to plant a landmine right in the middle of it. "David," I began, my voice unsteady, "there's something we need to tell you. It's difficult, and it concerns your nomination." He leaned forward, his expression instantly shifting from concerned son to sharp-witted lawyer. "Okay," he said slowly, "I'm listening." I looked at Eleanor, but she was staring at her hands, unable to speak. The burden fell to me. I took a deep breath and began the story, starting with their move to D.C., the clerkship, the name Marcus Thorne. As I spoke, I watched David's face. He listened intently, his expression unreadable, his lawyer's mask firmly in place. When I got to the part about the affair, I watched for the shock, the anger, the disgust. I saw none of it. He just sat there, his eyes fixed on me, his face a calm, placid lake. It was unnerving. Eleanor finally found her voice, picking up the narrative. She spoke of her fear, of Thorne's manipulative nature, of her guilt. Her voice was thick with tears, a mother's desperate, belated confession. She explained our fear that Thorne would recognize the name and use this old secret to sabotage his confirmation. "We are so sorry, David," she finished, her voice breaking completely. "To bring this into your life now, it's unforgivable." David was silent for a long moment. He didn't look at his mother. He looked at me. The silence stretched on, thick and unbearable. I braced myself for the explosion, for the accusations, for the end of his respect for us. When he finally spoke, his voice was eerily calm. "I know," he said. Just 2 words. I frowned. "You know? What do you mean you know? How could you possibly know?" He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. The calm demeanor wasn't a mask, it was genuine. It was the calm of someone who wasn't surprised. "A few years ago," he began, his voice measured, "I was working on a case that involved some old judicial misconduct claims. I was digging through archives, sealed depositions, that sort of thing. Judge Thorne's name came up." There were whispers, rumors from decades ago about his behavior with his female clerks. It was a pattern. He paused, his eyes flicking to Eleanor for a fraction of a second. In one of the documents, a list of his clerks from the mid-'80s was included as an appendix. I saw Mom's name. I didn't want to believe it. I told myself it was just a rumor, that she was just on a list. I buried it. I suppose I didn't want to know for sure. I was stunned. He had known, or suspected, and he had carried that suspicion alone for years. The strength, the maturity of it was astounding. "But that's not the real problem," David continued, his voice dropping slightly. He looked from my face to Eleanor's, and for the first time I saw a flicker of pain in his eyes. "The affair itself, it's sordid, and it's a political risk, yes. A reporter could spin it into a story about influence and power, but it's not the thing that will ruin my nomination." I was confused. "What are you talking about? What could be worse than that?" David took a deep breath. He seemed to be steeling himself. He looked directly at me, his gaze so intense it felt like he was looking straight into my soul. "Dad," he said, his voice soft but clear as a bell, "the problem isn't that Mom had an affair with Judge Thorne." He paused, and in that pause, I felt the world shift again, a final tectonic realignment that would shatter everything permanently. "The problem," he said, his voice cracking with an emotion he could no longer contain, "is that I'm not your son. I'm his." Hung in the sterile, air-conditioned office, sucking all the oxygen from the room. My mind simply refused to accept them. It was static, a high-pitched whine in my ears. "I'm not your son. I'm his." It was a sentence from a bad movie, a line of dialogue so melodramatic it couldn't possibly be real. But the look on David's face was real. The tears welling in Eleanor's eyes were real. The sudden, crushing weight on my chest, the feeling of my heart being ripped from its moorings was terrifyingly real. I stared at David, my son, this man I had raised, and for the first time, I saw the ghost of another man in his features. The sharp jawline, the intense eyes, the patrician nose I had always attributed to some distant relative on Eleanor's side. It was him. It was Thorne. I was looking at the son of Judge Marcus Thorne. A choked, guttural sound escaped my lips. It was a sound of pure agony. I felt my entire life, every memory, every cherished moment, curdle and turn to poison. David's first steps, his first word, which was Dada, teaching him to ride a bike, my hand on the back of the seat, the pride of his graduation. Every single memory was a lie, a beautifully crafted 36-year-long lie. I turned my gaze to Eleanor. She was no longer crying. She was looking at me with an expression of such profound, abject misery that it transcended grief. It was the face of a soul that had been condemned long ago. "Is it true?" I whispered, though I already knew the answer. She nodded, a single, jerky movement. "Yes," she breathed. The story came tumbling out of her then, the final, most damnable piece of the secret she had carried. After she had ended the affair with Thorne and quit her clerkship, she discovered she was pregnant. She was terrified. She didn't know who the father was. She prayed it was me. But as the months went on, the timing, the dates, she knew. She knew it was Thorne's. But she was too scared to tell me, too scared to tell him. So she said nothing. She let me believe this child was ours. She let me give him my name. She let me raise him, love him, pour every ounce of my being into him, all while knowing he was the product of her betrayal. David picked up the story, his voice heavy with a sorrow that seemed years old. "About a year ago," he said, avoiding my gaze, "I did one of those ancestry DNA kits, just for fun. When the results came back, I started building a family tree, and nothing matched up. On my paternal side, there was no link to your family, Dad, to Grandpa or Grandpa Peterson. Nothing." He swallowed hard. I confronted Mom. She couldn't deny it anymore. She told me everything. So he had known for a year? This brilliant, composed man had been carrying this world-shattering secret for a full year, protecting me from it? He had been living a double life, the successful lawyer and nominee on the surface, and the tormented son of a lie underneath. The nomination had forced his hand. As he explained, the FBI background check for a federal judgeship is brutally thorough. They delve into every aspect of your life, your family, your history. It was only a matter of time before they uncovered the discrepancy, the biological truth. And Thorne, seeing his own son, a son he never knew he had, nominated for a position under his review, the fallout would be catastrophic. Not just for David, but for all of us. I stood up. My legs felt like lead. I couldn't be in that room anymore. I couldn't look at the woman who had betrayed me so completely, or the young man who was the living embodiment of that betrayal. I didn't say a word. I just turned and walked out of the office, past the concerned-looking secretary, into the elevator. As the doors slid shut, I caught a final glimpse of them. My wife and the son I had called my own, two figures frozen in a tableau of shared tragedy. I walked the city streets for hours, a ghost in my own life. The bustling crowds, the screech of traffic, the towering buildings, it was all a foreign landscape. I was a man without a country, a man without a past. Every memory I had was now a forgery. Was the love I felt real? Was the joy I experienced genuine? Or was I just a character in a play, an unwitting fool whose role was to be the doting father and the loving husband? I ended up in a sterile hotel room miles from my own home. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the generic art on the wall, and I wept. I wept for the young man I had been, so full of love and trust. I wept for the marriage I thought I had, a 37-year partnership built on an unthinkable lie. And most of all, I wept for the loss of my son. Because in that moment, he felt lost to me. The biological tie had been severed, and I feared the emotional one would bleed out right along with it. The love I felt for him was tangled up in so much pain and betrayal that I couldn't separate the threads. I was utterly, completely, and irrevocably broken. Weeks passed in a blur of gray anonymity. I stayed in the hotel, ignoring the dozens of calls and texts from both Eleanor and David. I was an island of grief, and I didn't want any ships approaching my shore. I spent my days walking through parks, sitting in coffee shops, watching families laugh and play, feeling a bitter envy that was as sharp as broken glass. I was a father without a son, a husband without a wife. I was just Sam, and I wasn't sure who that was anymore. One crisp autumn afternoon, as I was sitting on a park bench, my phone rang. It was David. I almost declined it, as I had all the others, but something made me answer. "Dad?" his voice said, hesitant and small. The word "dad" struck me like a physical blow. "I'm not your father, David," I said, my own voice cold and unfamiliar. There was a painful silence on the other end. "You are," he said, his voice firm, resolute. "You are the only father I have ever known. Biology doesn't change that. Biology doesn't teach you how to throw a baseball. It doesn't help you with your homework. It doesn't show you what it means to be a good man. You did all of that." His words were a balm on a raw, open wound. "I need to see you," he said. "Please, I have something to tell you in person." I agreed, my resolve worn down by weeks of solitary misery. We met at a quiet diner, a neutral ground, far from the homes that were now filled with so much pain. He looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes. The weight of the world seemed to be resting on his broad shoulders. "I withdrew my nomination this morning," he said, before I could even speak. I stared at him, speechless. "What? Why? David, that was your dream." "It was," he agreed, nodding. "But it's not worth this. It's not worth losing my family. It's not worth losing you." He reached across the table, his hand covering mine. His touch was warm, familiar. "I don't care about being a judge if it means destroying the man I call my father. You are my foundation, Dad, not him, never him, you." Tears welled in my eyes, hot and sudden. For the first time in weeks, a flicker of warmth penetrated the ice that had encased my heart. He had chosen me. Over his ambition, over his dream, he had chosen his relationship with me. He had called me his foundation. In that moment, the biology didn't matter. The 36 years of love and life we had shared, those were real. The lies had been Eleanor's, not David's. He was as much a victim in this as I was. We talked for hours. He told me about the turmoil of the past year, the anger and confusion he felt, and his overwhelming desire to protect me from the truth. I told him about my pain, my sense of betrayal, the feeling that my life had been erased. It was a raw, honest, and excruciatingly painful conversation, but it was a necessary one. It was the first step toward rebuilding something on the scorched earth of our old life. That evening, I drove home. The house looked the same, but it felt different. Eleanor was in the living room, surrounded by boxes. She was packing. When she saw me, she flinched, expecting the anger and recriminations to start again. "I'll be gone by the morning," she said, her voice a hollow whisper. "I'll go stay with my sister. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I know those words are useless now, but they're all I have." I looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time since the confession. I didn't see the young, deceitful girl in the photograph anymore. I saw a woman who had been crushed by the weight of a terrible secret for nearly 4 decades. I saw the fear that had driven her, the guilt that had consumed her, and the love for me and for David that had, perversely, motivated her silence. The anger was gone, burned out, leaving only a vast, aching sadness. "Where will we go from here, Ellie?" I asked, the old pet name slipping out, surprising us both. She looked up, her eyes wide with a sliver of hope. "I don't know," she said. "I assumed there was no we." I walked over to the mantelpiece and picked up a silver-framed photograph. It was of me and David, when he was about 5, at a baseball game. He was sitting on my shoulders, a tiny baseball cap on his head, his face split by a gap-toothed grin. I was looking up at him, my own face filled with an expression of pure, unconditional love. I remembered that day. I remembered the smell of the hot dogs, the roar of the crowd, the weight of his small body on my shoulders. The joy I felt in that moment was real. The love was real. No secret, no lie, no biological fact could ever change that. The foundation was a lie, I said, my voice quiet but steady, speaking as much to myself as to her. But the home we built upon it was real. I placed the photograph back on the mantle. The future was a terrifying, uncharted territory. I didn't know if I could ever forgive her. I didn't know if our marriage could be salvaged from the wreckage. But I knew that David was my son, and I knew that the love I had for him was the truest thing in my life. And now, I said, turning to face my wife of 37 years, we have to decide if it was strong enough to stand.